Timothy Burns, known as Tim to his friends, checked his cell phone after leaving a message for his wife of 5 years, Candace, who preferred to be called Candy. He had just signed a service contract with a major California company that had offices nationwide. He knew his boss, Jake Hudson, would be thrilled because the new contract meant significant growth for his IT firm and a considerable salary increase for him. Maybe now, he thought, he and Candy could finally start the family they had planned. But he couldn't shake the doubts that had crept in after his camping trip with Jake just over a week ago. Something was off with Candy when they got back. She seemed distracted most of the time and had started snapping at him. But that wasn't all. When they got home and threw their clothes into the laundry basket, he noticed something odd in the gusset of her underwear. He picked them up and found that whatever it was had hardened and had a very distinctive smell. Then it hit him, and his world felt like it was falling apart. Determined to uncover the truth, he visited an attorney to explore his options, since he would be heading to the West Coast soon. If Candy had cheated, it would end their marriage. "Are you sure your wife is cheating on you?" asked Ruby Hawkins, a family law and divorce lawyer recommended by a friend who had just divorced his wife for cheating. "Not 100%, Tim replied, "but I need to know, and if she is, I want a divorce." "Most divorces in this state happen without anyone being at fault," Ruby explained. "You can file on the grounds of infidelity, but you'll need solid evidence." "Like photographs or videos?" Tim asked. "Exactly," Ruby said. "I can hire an investigator to follow her and find out for sure if you'd like." "Yes, please," Tim agreed. "What can I expect during a divorce?" he asked. "Since she earns about the same as you from your teaching job, you likely won't have to pay child support," Ruby explained. "You don't own any property and have no children, so assets will be split 50-50. You keep your pension and she keeps hers. If we can prove infidelity, we'll use that to secure a favorable outcome. I'll start the paperwork and send it once we have the evidence." "Okay," Tim said. "Let's do it. I'll be out of town for about 3 days, so I think that's when she'll probably do it." Ruby called her investigator, Marvin Johnson, who suggested Tim install a tracking app on her phone. He also gave Tim a device to record phone calls on his landline and an audio recorder to hide in her purse. Tim hated doing this, but he needed to know the truth. There were other signs, too. Ever since the camping trip, Jake had been more arrogant and condescending, almost like he knew something Tim didn't. Tim held out for a week, and Candy drove him to the airport, kissing him goodbye. "I'll call you this evening after dinner," he said. "Okay, honey," she replied. "Have a good flight." The first night Tim was away, he called Candy as promised, and was surprised when she told him she would be waitressing at a party Jake was hosting that evening. According to Candy, one of the waitresses was sick, and Jake asked if she could fill in. "He didn't mention any plans earlier. He promised to pay me $150 for the night," Candy said. "I could use the extra money since I won't be back to work for a couple of weeks." Tim knew classes would start soon, and she needed the money, but something felt off. "Really?" Tim asked. "Okay, go ahead, but be careful and tell me about it tomorrow, okay?" "Okay," she replied. "You know I love you, right?" "Yes," he said. "And I love you too. Good night." After ending the call, a knot twisted in his stomach. He called the investigator. "I wanted to let you know that Candy was asked to waitress at a party at Jake Hudson's house," Tim said. "Okay," Marvin replied. "We'll keep an eye on her and let you know what we find out." "Thank you," Tim said, ending the call. The next day, he called Candy on her cell phone but got no answer. He also called his home phone but only reached the answering machine. He reassured himself that she didn't spend the night with Jake. However, his hopes were crushed when he received an email from Marvin that day. "Candy spent the night at Hudson's house and she is still there," the email read. "She was very busy last night. I've attached a couple of photos, but be warned they are quite graphic. I will give you my full report when you return." Tim opened the attachments and his heart sank. His beloved wife of 5 years had lovemaking with 3 men. Damn it, 3 men. Men he once considered friends. His hands started to shake and tears flowed from his eyes. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He tried calling her again, but it went straight to voicemail. He also called his home phone, but only reached the answering machine. Without leaving a message, he went to the hotel bar to drown his sorrows. The next morning, he checked the tracker and found that Candy's phone was still at Jake's house, meaning she was likely still there. Marvin confirmed this with an email containing 2 more photographs of his wife. The nature of the photos was the same as the previous ones, but with 10 men, including Jake, his son Mike, and 5 more of Jake's IT company employees. These were people he once saw as reliable colleagues, but no longer. He didn't recognize the other 3 and assumed they were Mike's friends. He completed his business with the California client, contract in hand, checked out of the hotel, and caught an early flight home. He took a taxi from the airport and noticed Candy's car was missing when he arrived home. Checking the tracker, he saw her phone was still at Jake's house. He went inside, changed clothes, and called Ruby's office. He was surprised when her receptionist said she was available and could see him in the afternoon. He called Candy on her cell phone and was surprised when she answered, sounding out of breath. "Hello?" she said. "Hi, it's me, Tim," he replied. "Where are you?" "I'm home," she answered. "Just finishing up a few things before class starts." He was stunned by her blatant lie. "I see," he said. "Well, I'm done here in California and I'm heading home." "Oh, okay," she responded. "I missed you so much. Call me when you land and I'll pick you up at the airport." "No, don't worry," he said. "I'll take a taxi. Bye." He ended the call, wondering if she noticed that he didn't say he loved her or mentioned seeing her later. Shaking his head, he left the house to visit Ruby. Candy looked at the phone after Tim ended the call. He always ended calls by saying he loved her, but this time he didn't. His voice didn't sound friendly either. She had planned to return home after the first night, but lying undressed between Jake and his son felt too good to leave. She thought she owed it to herself. This would all end when classes started again, she reasoned, and Tim would never know. So she spent the next day and night with Jake and his son Mike. That second day, Jake went to work for a few hours, but Mike kept her busy and even arranged for several of his friends to join them. When Jake returned home, she was having lovemaking with Mike on Jake's bed. When they finished, Jake looked at her and said with a sly smile, "So, maybe I should send your husband away more often." "You know my classes are resuming soon," she said. "So I won't be available for a week. I wouldn't dare do anything like that while he's still at home." "Why not?" Jake asked. "Maybe he'd enjoy seeing how real men treat you for a change." Jake and Mike both laughed. "Well, I have to admit I had a great time," she said, "but I still love Tim, and I don't want to hurt him." "Maybe I can arrange for him to be sent away for the weekend," Jake said. "Then you can come and play with us." "Sounds funny," she said, "but at some point he'll find out. Tim isn't a fool, you know." "Don't worry," Jake said, picking up his video camera. "I'll handle Timmy boy. There's just one thing." "What is it?" she asked. "I don't want you to have lovemaking with him anymore," Jake said. "Now you belong to us, understood?" "But how will I manage that?" she asked. "You'll think of something," Jake said. "Come up with an excuse, like, I have a headache or something." "Okay, I'll try," she said. Later that day, several of Mike's friends came over and had their turn with Candy. Jake invited a few single guys from the group. She was now officially a party promiscuous and enjoying it. Tim was utterly shocked when he saw all the evidence Marvin had collected. Besides the photographs, there were 2 DVDs of videos showing his wife performing various acts with several men, things she would never do for him. His love for her faded as he watched her debauchery. Ruby consoled him as best she could, but it was a lost cause. How could she, just like that, turn into such a traitor after 5 years, he wondered. What did I do to deserve this? And what about Jake? He had considered this older man a friend. Now he knew better. "I'll go ahead and file for divorce citing infidelity," Ruby said. "If you want, I can also file a lawsuit for alienation of affection against Jake and the men you work with. These lawsuits don't usually go very far, but I think we can get a good settlement." "Do what you have to do," Tim said. "Just don't do anything stupid," Ruby cautioned. "I don't want to bail you out of jail." Tim shook his head. "Don't worry," he said. "I won't. When can you prepare the documents?" "I can have everything ready to ship in just a couple of days," she said. "In the meantime, try to behave normally around your wife." "I'm not that good an actor," Tim admitted, "and I will never touch her again. God only knows what she got from all those men." "Tell her you're not feeling well," Ruby suggested. "That should buy you some time." Tim nodded. "Yes, okay," he said before leaving. As he sat in his car, he realized something else. There was no way he could work for Jake again, and he couldn't bear the presence of men who had betrayed him. He took out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he wanted. He dialed and hoped for the best. "Carlson," said the man on the other end when he answered. "John, this is Tim Burns," Tim said. "Tim, how are you, old friend?" John asked. "It could be better," Tim said. Listen, is the vacancy at Empire still open? John Carlson, CEO of Empire, had been trying to get Tim on board for some time, but Tim felt he needed to stay with Jake out of loyalty. Now that loyalty was gone. Of course it is, John replied. Have you finally decided to join a reputable company? Yeah, something like that, Tim said. Some things caught my attention, and I realized I could no longer work there. I'm sorry to hear that, John said. Is there anything I can do? Just give me a job, Tim said. I promise I'll work just as hard for you as I did for Jake. Of course, John said. Can you start on Monday? Absolutely, Tim replied. Okay, John said. Why don't you and your wife come over tonight and try Rose's famous lasagna? We can catch up, and I can discuss the compensation package with you. I'd love to, but unfortunately I can't bring my wife, Tim said. Why not? John asked. What's happened? I don't want to go into detail over the phone, Tim said. I can explain more tonight if you want. Of course, Tim, John said, sounding concerned. You know Rose is a licensed counselor. Maybe she can help you if you want. That actually sounds good, John. I appreciate it, Tim said. Okay, John said. I'll call Rose and let her know. Can you come over at, say, 6:30 p.m.? Of course, Tim said. Today at 6:30. Thanks again, buddy. With pleasure, John said. They ended the conversation, and Tim felt a huge weight lift off his shoulders. He started the car and headed home. When he got there, he noticed Candy still hadn't returned from Jake's house. He grabbed his briefcase and went inside. After taking a shower and changing clothes, he sat down at the computer to write his resignation letter. Candy finally arrived around 5 p.m. and saw her husband at the computer. She went to kiss him, but he turned away, so she ended up kissing him on the cheek. Surprised, she looked at him before speaking. Everything is fine? She asked. Not really, he said. I don't feel well. Maybe it's jet lag or something. I don't know. I'll sleep on the futon when I get back tonight. Will you come back? She asked. Where are you going? I'm meeting someone for dinner, he said. Are you dating a woman? She asked, concerned. You mean, am I cheating on you? He asked. No, I never cheated on you in all the time we were together, and I have no intention of doing it now. Can you say the same? She recoiled in horror. Does he know? She wondered. No, he could never have found out. Of course I can, she said. Tim wasn't convinced. So, how was your trip to California? She asked, trying to change the subject. Successful, he said. How was your little job at Jake's house? Everything went well, she said. Even when it was hard, it was still fun. I bet, he said flatly. He looked at his watch before speaking again. I guess I'll go, he told her before saving his work and turning off the computer. He stood up, walked past her without a word, and headed to the master bedroom to change into something less casual. When he came out, Candy was sitting on the sofa. How long will you be gone? She asked. I don't know, he said. Don't wait up for me. Bye. He grabbed his keys and headed to the door. She couldn't help but notice he didn't kiss her or say he loved her, something he always did when leaving the house. Seeing his car drive away, she picked up the home phone and called Jake, unaware that the conversation was being recorded. Jake, I think he knows something, she said. What makes you think that? Jake asked. He didn't touch me at all, she said. Usually he always kisses me and says he loves me, but he didn't. He seemed so cold and just left, saying he had a dinner appointment. With whom? Jake asked. He didn't say? No, he didn't, she said. Jake, what if he knows? What if he plans to leave me? So what if he does? Jake said. You can always come and stay with us, and don't worry about Timmy boy. I'll keep him so busy he'll hardly ever be home. But I don't want to lose him, Candy exclaimed. I love him. Jake laughed loudly. Yes, you've shown us all how much you love him over the past 2 days, haven't you? Jake asked. It's not funny, Jake, she said. I know what I did with you guys, and yes, I liked it. But I still love him. I don't want to lose him. Yes, exactly, said Jake. Let him get this out of his head. After a while, he'll come around, and if he doesn't, well, we can do something about it too. You're not going to hurt him, are you? She asked. Not in many words, Jake said. We just have to show him how things will be from now on, and you will help make this happen. What? Candy asked in shock. When the time comes, you will help us explain everything to him. Remember who you belong to. Now, I'm sure you wouldn't want the school board to see the video footage we have of you. You wouldn't dare, Candy said. Oh yeah, but I'd love to, Jake said. I have a video of you on a hike and plenty of videos of you in very compromising positions. Your rear literally belongs to me, so you need to keep little Timmy in line. Feeling trapped, Candy gave in. Okay, Jake, she said, but don't hurt him. Jake chuckled over the phone. Yes, as you say, he said, ending the conversation. Tim drove up to the large 2-story house where John and Rose Carlson lived. He got out of the car, grabbing a bottle of wine he had picked up on the way. John opened the door as he rang the bell and graciously accepted the wine. Come in, Tim, John said with a smile. And thanks. This will be put to good use tonight. John led Tim to the dining room where Rose was waiting with her lasagna. Tim, please meet my wife, Rose, John said. Rose, this is Tim Burns, our new customer service representative. Tim shook Rose's hand while John opened the wine. Nice to meet you, Tim, Rose said with a smile. Glad to meet you too, Rose, Tim said. Please call me Rose, she said. Mrs. Carlson sounds so official. They took their places at the table, and Rose served lasagna while John poured the wine. Tim had never tasted such delicious lasagna and expressed his gratitude. This is the best lasagna I've ever eaten, he said. I'm glad you like it, Rose said. This is one of my signature dishes. So, Tim, I don't want to pry, but I'm curious as to why you decided to leave Jake so quickly, John said. Something happened, Tim nodded before starting. Yeah, something happened. Please, Tim, tell us about it, Rose asked. Tim took a moment to collect his thoughts before telling them the story. Damn, John said. That's chilling. I really sympathize with you. Something similar happened to me, but the circumstances were different. So what are you going to do now besides changing jobs? I've met with a lawyer and I'm filing for divorce, Tim said. My lawyer says it will be an even split. What about counseling? Rose asked. Did you consider that? This has gone too far, Tim said. I don't know what got into Candy. It's like she flipped a switch and suddenly became promiscuous. I never thought she had it in her. How are you coping with all this? Rose asked. Not too well, Tim said. My lawyer says I should try to act normally around Candy, but it's very difficult. I can't even look at her. Maybe you should see a psychologist, she suggested. I can do that, Tim said. Trust me, Rose is the best in the business, John said. I think she can help you get through this if you want. Plus, it's included in your benefits package. That's definitely a plus, Tim said, laughing. I'm serious, John said. Rose was a godsend when I needed her. I know she can help you too. He turned to Rose. What do you think? Can you fit it into your schedule? Of course, she said. I think an hour a week should do the trick. What do you say, Tim? Tim thought about the proposal before answering. Okay, I'll do it, he said. John smiled and patted Tim on the shoulder. Good man, he said. I'll make sure you have the time necessary for consultation. Coordinate with Rose and let me know what you come up with. I'll do that. Thanks, Tim said. Now, if you don't mind, honey, Tim and I will retire to my office to discuss his new job, John said. I don't mind at all, she replied with a smile. And I'm looking forward to working with you too, Tim. Thank you, Tim said, standing next to John. They moved to John's home office where he poured them each a glass of brandy. They spent the next 2 hours discussing his new role. By the time they finished, Tim felt like he was taking control of his life again. He shook John's hand and headed back home. It was around 10 p.m. when Tim arrived at his house. He saw that the lights were still on. He hoped Candy was there alone. He got out of the car, walked into his house, and saw Candy sitting on the sofa. So, how did your little meeting go? She asked. Very good, thank you, he said. Now, if you don't mind, I'll go to bed. Good night. He went into the second bedroom where his computer was and began to undress. Are you sleeping here now? Candy asked from the door. Yes, Tim said. I'm still not feeling well, so I'll sleep on the futon. Is this a problem? No, I guess not, she said. It's just that you've been gone for 3 days, and I was hoping that we could, play a little. I'm not in the mood today, Tim said. In fact, the thought of touching her made him feel disgusted. Okay, she said quietly. Maybe tomorrow. I don't know, he said. We'll see. She nodded and turned away, wondering if he knew anything about her recent actions. The next day, Tim got up before Candy, grabbed his resignation letter, and poured himself a cup of coffee. He saw Candy's purse on the kitchen table, grabbed the audio recorder, and downloaded the recording of yesterday's phone call. He left the apartment without saying goodbye or telling Candy he loved her. She heard the door close as he left and went back to bed, tears rolling down her cheeks. When he got to the office, he barely spoke to anyone. He greeted his secretary, then walked into his office and closed the door. He was gathering his things when Jake walked in. "What is this?" Jake asked. Tim reached into his briefcase and pulled out 2 envelopes. "One of them is a signed contract from California," he said, "and the second is my resignation, effective immediately. I believe you owe me a bonus for securing the California deal, along with my final salary and remaining vacation pay." "Resignation?" Jake asked in shock. "What the hell? Why are you leaving? I need you." "Seriously?" Tim asked. "You really don't know why? Do you think I'm stupid?" "Some things caught my attention and I decided I couldn't work here anymore. So I got a job at another company. I'll be leaving in a few minutes, then heading to HR." "Wait, Tim, can't we talk about this?" Jake asked. Tim shook his head. "There's nothing to talk about, Jake," Tim said. "I'm over it. Finished. I considered you my friend, but you stabbed me in the back and ruined my marriage. You can find someone else to betray." "So that's what this is about," Jake said. "Well, just so you know, your wife was more than willing to have lovemaking with me. We shouldn't let something like this ruin your career. Just go with the flow for a while. Let Candy sow some wild oats, and when she's done, she'll be all yours again." "Do you really think I would agree to something like that? By the way, how long have you been having fun with her?" "Well, the first time was at the campsite," Jake said, "on the second day when you and the others were skiing. And you should know that she pestered me that day. She even told me I'm bigger than you. She begged me to have lovemaking right there." Tim never turned down Candy. He tried several times, but he just couldn't do it. He couldn't explain why, and Candy never mentioned it. "And this was around the time you suddenly forced me to leave to take care of some things at the office, wasn't it?" Tim asked. "You wanted to get me out of the way so you could have lovemaking with my wife?" Jake grinned and nodded. "Yes, so what?" he asked. Tim wasn't done yet. "And this whole thing about hiring her as a waitress at your party was just another excuse to get her into bed, wasn't it?" Tim asked. "Yes, it was. So? So what?" Jake asked. Tim took out his phone and stopped the audio recording he had started when Jake entered the office. "Thank you for your confession," Tim said. "Now, if you don't mind, I'm done packing. I'll go to the HR department and won't bother you." "Wait," Jake said. "You can't use this recording." "We'll see," Tim said. "I'm leaving. Goodbye, Jake. You'll rot in hell." "Wait, you forgot something," Jake said, picking up the photo of Candy that Tim kept on his desk. "I haven't forgotten," Tim said. "I don't want it. You and your son want this traitor so badly, you can have her. I'm done with her and with you. Goodbye." With these words, he left the office. Jake watched Tim walk away, wondering what just happened. How did Tim find out what he and his son did to Candy? "What do you mean he resigned?" Candy asked when Jake called. "He just handed me the signed contract and resignation letter and left," Jake said. "He knows, Candy. I don't know how he knows, but he knows." "What did you say to him?" she asked. "The truth," said Jake. "I told him about how it was for the first time on the hike." "You're an idiot," she exclaimed. "Well?" he asked. "I told him," Jake said. "He also left a photo of you, which he kept on his desk. He said he didn't need it." "Amazing," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "So what should we do now?" she asked. "It's not my problem," Jake said. "He's your husband. You can handle this. Unless, of course, you want me to step up and make him see the error of his ways." "No," she said. "You've done enough. Thank you. Stay away from this. I'll deal with it." "As you say," he replied and hung up. Candy looked at her phone with tears streaming down her face. She didn't want a divorce, but she knew Tim wouldn't tolerate her cheating. She decided to do everything in her power to keep him. She sat on the sofa, holding her head in her hands, and sobbed over what she had done. A few minutes later, Tim pulled into the driveway. He saw Candy's car and looked around to see if Jake's car was anywhere nearby. Not seeing it, he grabbed his box and briefcase and went inside. He saw Candy on the couch and, without saying anything, went into his office. He closed and locked the door, then checked for voice recordings. He found the recording and listened to the conversation between Candy and Jake. He forwarded it to his lawyer and quickly called her. "Hi, Tim," she said. "I just received your last email. I'm preparing your documents now." "Okay," Tim said. "When can they be submitted?" "If you want, I can pull some strings, and my bailiff can deliver them later this afternoon," she said. "Will that suit you?" "That works." "Thank you," he said. After hanging up, he walked over to his weapons safe, opened it, and pulled out his old .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. He had no plans to use it, but didn't want any problems with Jake or Candy. He walked into the kitchen, put his briefcase on the table, and looked at Candy. "We need to talk," he said, placing the weapon on the table within reach. "Is this really necessary?" she asked, pointing to the weapon. "I hope not," he said. "I just want to be prepared in case your lover decides to break in here." "My lover?" she asked. "Don't play coy," he said. "I'm not in the mood for your games. Now sit down. We need to discuss something." She sat down, scared, not knowing what her husband was going to do. "First things first," Tim said. "Later today, someone will come by and give you the papers." Candy recoiled in shock. "Divorce?" she asked. "Why? I don't want a divorce. I love you." "Crap," Tim said. "I know everything about you, Jake, his son, and everyone else you've been having fun with the last few days. So I filed for divorce on charges of infidelity." "Infidelity?" she asked. "You don't have any evidence of this." Tim smiled, taking out an envelope. He laid out several time-stamped photos, all clearly showing her having lovemaking with multiple men, including Jake. "I also have video and audio," Tim said. "Would you like to watch?" She shook her head, realizing it was hopeless. "Okay," he said. "Considering the circumstances, I was more than fair. No support. You get half of what's in the bank, and we each keep our pensions. You can take all your things. I've already paid and canceled your credit card. I have a cashier's check for your half of what's left. There is also a restraining order that says you must stay at least 150 meters away from me, my residence, and my workplace. So from now until you are served with the documents, you have time to pack up your things." "Are you kicking me out?" she asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. "That's pretty much it," he said. "But what if I decide to contest the divorce?" she asked. Tim laughed. "I don't think that would be very wise," he said. "What do you think the school board would say if some of these photos and videos just happened to appear? Do you think the parents of your students would want someone like you teaching their children? I think not." "You wouldn't dare," she exclaimed. "Do you want to take that chance?" Tim asked. Candy looked down for a moment before shaking her head. "No," she said. "I need this job." "That's right. That's how it will be," Tim said. "There are a couple more things you should know." "What?" she asked dejectedly. "You will be required to hand over your rings and give up my last name," he said. "Oh my God, you've become a heartless prick, haven't you?" she asked, taking off her rings. "Yes, well, you gave me a good reason," Tim said. "I just want to know one thing. What happened? What made you turn from a loving, faithful wife into this?" She lowered her eyes before speaking. "It happened on the second day of the hike," she said. "You were on the boat and I was in the tent. Jake walked by and saw me. I'd already undressed and was lying there trying to rest when Jake came in. At first he seemed embarrassed to see me undressed. We started talking and then he pulled his pants down and that was it." "So some guy takes off his pants and you immediately jump on him," said Tim, "and that's all it took for you to become a traitor. How many times did you have lovemaking with him on that trip?" "Twice," she said. "The first time when you were jet skiing, and the second time when Jake sent you back to the office." Tim shook his head and pointed at the photographs. "I see that none of your lovers used any protection," he said. "Weren't you worried about getting pregnant or catching something?" "I'm still taking the pills," she said. "That doesn't mean you can't get pregnant," Tim said. "And you can still get sick. Is this what you planned?" "Oh, God, no," she said. Tim shook his head. "You know, during our entire time together, I was often pestered by women who, compared to you, look like goddesses," he said. "I refused them all. Do you know why? Because I thought I had a loving and faithful wife at home, and I would never do anything to hurt her. But you? You didn't even consider what you were doing. You didn't care how I felt. I hope it was all worth it for you. Now pack up your junk. I expect you to leave when you are served with the documents." "Tim, please," she began. "Can't we turn to a psychologist? Please, I promise I'll never do this again. Can't you forgive me this time?" "I will never forgive you for what you did," Tim said, his expression harsher than she had ever seen before. "Never. Maybe if you slipped just once, were molested or something like that, I might overlook it. But that didn't happen. From the moment Jake pulled his pants down, you were his willing toy. I will never be able to forgive this level of betrayal." "But don't you love me enough to get through this?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I can't stand the sight of you right now," he said. "The sooner you disappear from my life, the better. Now go and start packing. Everything you leave behind will either be burned, thrown away, or donated to Goodwill." Sobbing, she got up and went to the master bedroom to pack her things. Tim watched as Candy pulled out one full garbage bag after another. She stopped and looked at him. "Can you at least help me carry this to the car?" she asked. No, said Tim. It's your trash. You deal with it. And remember, everything you leave behind will either be burned or thrown away. This includes photographs and your wedding dress. Would you burn my wedding dress? She asked. My parents paid thousands for this dress. Well, then you better take it if you don't want it to burn, Tim said. Sobbing, she carried the bag to her car and returned for another. Damn it, Tim asked himself. How much junk does she have? A couple of hours later, she sat down, exhausted. I can't fit anything else in the car, she said. Can I come back later for the rest, please? No, said Tim. You will not be allowed closer than 150 meters to this place. Ask your parents if they can come pick them up. I will refrain from throwing anything away for a few days. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it, she said. Oh my God. I was just wondering, what am I going to tell my parents? Try telling the truth for a change, Tim said. Tell them you cheated on me with my boss and others and I threw you out. Seriously? She asked. They will disown me if I do this. That's not my problem, Tim said. But it will be much worse if you try to paint me as the bad guy. You know how your parents feel about lying. There was a knock on the door. I think this is for you, Tim said. Candy walked slowly to the door and opened it to reveal the deputy sheriff. Candace Burns? He asked. She nodded. Yes, that's me, she said. Do you have any identification? He asked. She took out her driver's license and showed it to him. After examining it, he returned it and handed her an envelope. You've been served, ma'am, he said. There is also an injunction that requires you to vacate the premises immediately. You can sign the divorce papers now if you want. She nodded and took out the divorce papers. After looking through them, she asked for a pen and signed the papers. I'll give this back to the lawyer, the deputy said. You need to leave right now. If you try to return, you will be arrested and sent to jail. Do you understand? Yes, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked back at Tim. I'm so sorry, she said. Yeah, me too, Tim said. Bye. Goodbye, she said quietly, leaving. The deputy looked at Tim and nodded before walking away. The next few days were hectic for Tim. Candy never tried to contact him, but Jake called his home phone twice and left threatening messages. Damn it, Tim, I know you're there, he shouted. If you don't drop this lawsuit, I'll come and kick your freaking back. Tim smiled, copied the voicemail, and forwarded it to Ruby, who then notified the local sheriff's department. Candy's parents also called, asking if they could come pick up some more of her things. Yes, of course, said Tim. Just make sure she's not with you. She has a restraining order. Okay, said George, Candy's father, with a sigh. When George and Candy's mother, Bernice, arrived, they took what Candy had left behind and used the time to try to convince Tim to call off the divorce. Tim, she made a mistake, Bernice said. Surely you can forgive her and take her back. She's crazy about you. What did she tell you, Bernice? Tim asked. She said she had a fight with your boss, Bernice said. And that's all? Tim asked. Well, yes, she said. She didn't go into detail and we didn't press her. Tim grabbed an envelope with photographs and DVDs and showed them to Bernice and George. They were shocked when they saw the photos. I'm sorry she didn't tell you the whole truth, Tim said. As you can see, it turned out to be much worse than she made it seem. Oh my God, Bernice said. I had no idea it was so bad. I'm so sorry, Tim. I don't blame you for what you did. George's face turned purple with rage. I will have a long conversation with our foolish daughter, he said. Have you done anything else with these photographs? Tim shook his head. Not yet, but I warned her not to contest the divorce. They sympathized with him for a moment and then finished packing up the rest of her things. Half an hour later, they left the house, giving Tim a warm hug and wishing him all the best. Later that day, as Tim was watching TV, there was another knock on the door. He looked through the peephole and saw Jake, Mike, and two of Tim's former colleagues. He walked into his office, grabbed the weapon from the weapon case, and called emergency. Holding the weapon behind his back, he barely managed to open the door before they rushed inside. We'll kick your freaking back, Jake growled. Tim pulled out his weapon and pointed it at Jake, forcing them to stop. You're not really going to shoot us, Jake said. You don't have the courage. Do you really want to test that? Tim asked. Just so you know, I already called emergency and the police are on their way. If you're here when they arrive, you'll be arrested for violating the restraining order. Jake, I think he's serious, said one of the other men. Jake looked at him, then turned back to Tim. At that moment, they all heard a siren nearby and saw flashing red and blue lights. Yes, Jake, I'm serious, Tim said. They turned to leave, but two large, uniformed police officers stood in the doorway. Tim lowered the weapon. "Put the weapon down, sir," one of the officers said. Tim obeyed, placing the weapon on the kitchen table. "Officer, these people are violating the restraining order," Tim said. "They broke into my house and threatened me. I want them arrested." "Do you have a copy of the order?" asked another policeman. Tim nodded. "I have it, officer," Tim said. He pulled out an envelope from the kitchen table and handed it to the officer, who carefully studied the order. After a few moments, he returned it to Tim and turned to the four men. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," the officer said. The four men glared at Tim as officers handcuffed them and read them their rights. Once they were secured, one of the officers turned to Tim. "Do you have a license for this firearm?" he asked. "Yes, I do," Tim said. "Would you like to see it?" He pulled out his wallet and showed the officer his driver's license and his NRA firearms training card. The officer nodded after studying the cards. "Okay," he said. "Be careful with this thing. Do you hear me?" "I hear you, officer," Tim said. "Thank you." The next 3 months passed in a blur for Tim. He enjoyed working at Empire much more than he ever did working for Jake. Weekly counseling with Rose helped him deal with trust and anger issues. Additionally, he joined a gym and worked out 3 days a week. He also began taking martial arts classes, more for mental discipline than anything else. On top of that, he took a diet and exercise course recommended by Rose. The divorce went through the system smoothly, especially since Candy didn't contest it. However, the alienation of affection lawsuits were different. Ruby warned that they might eventually be fired, and 2 of them were. The case against Jake, however, surprised both Tim and Ruby. After hearing testimony, reviewing the evidence presented by Ruby, and examining Jake's financial statements, the judge ruled in Tim's favor and ordered Jake to pay $1 million in damages. At the end of the trial, the judge didn't have kind words for Jake. "Mr. Hudson, your conduct in this matter is beyond reprehensible," the judge said. "You not only took advantage of a man who considered you a friend, but you also misused your position as his employer to deliberately destroy his marriage and family. I also noticed that you have repeatedly violated the restraining order against you. Therefore, I find in favor of the plaintiff and order you to pay $1 million in compensation." "Your Honor, this is highly illegal," Jake's lawyer said, standing up. "Mr. Winthrop, this court finds Mr. Hudson's conduct not only unlawful, but absolutely disgusting. The decision stands," the judge said. "When should this restitution be made?" asked Ed Winthrop. "Immediately," said the judge, "unless, of course, your client chooses to spend some time in jail for contempt of court." "No, Your Honor, my client will pay as ordered," Winthrop said, sitting back down. "Okay," said the judge, "and God help you if that check gets rejected. Case closed." He banged his gavel, ending the hearing. Jake wrote out a check and gave it to his lawyer, who handed it to the bailiff. After the judge took note of the check, the bailiff gave it to Ruby, who then handed it to Tim. To Tim's surprise, the check was honored by the bank, allowing him to pay Ruby her share of the judgment. While working at Empire, several of Jake's clients contacted Tim. Word of the lawsuit spread widely, and many companies were hesitant to continue doing business with someone who intentionally ruined another man's marriage. They believed that a person who would deliberately destroy a friend's marriage couldn't be trusted. With the way things were going, Tim believed Jake would go bankrupt within a year. Throughout this time, Tim refused to go on dates, despite interest from several nice women at the company. He felt that he would remain a married man until his divorce was final. Once that happened, he would be free to date, but not before. When the divorce was finally finalized, he celebrated with friends from work. A couple of months later, Candy's mother called him. "Tim, this is Bernice. Do you have a few minutes?" she asked. "Of course, Bernice," he said. "What's happening?" "It's Candy," she said. "She's HIV positive. She just received her test results." "I'm sorry to hear that, Bernice," Tim said, "but honestly, I'm not surprised. Besides, we're officially divorced now, so there's nothing I can do about it. She is not covered by my insurance, and I am not responsible for her." "I know," Bernice said. "I was just hoping that maybe you would understand and talk to her a little." "Well, I think I can, but I don't know what good it will do," he said. "Please, just come and talk to her for a few minutes," Bernice begged. Tim thought for a moment before answering. "Okay," he said. "I'll come by for a few minutes." "Thank you very much," Bernice said. Tim drove up to Bernice and George's house and was shocked to see how thin and frail Candy looked. She walked towards him, but he waved her away. Saddened, she sat down and invited him to sit on the sofa. "You look good, Tim," she said. "Better than I remember. How are things going with you?" "Okay, Candy," he said. "New job, new friends, new outlook on life. How are you doing?" "Not good at all," she said. "You know that I am HIV positive?" "That's what your mother said," he told her. "I'm sorry to hear this, but to be honest, I'm not surprised. Do you know when you became infected?" "I think it was one of the days I spent at Jake's," she said. "That day I had a lot of unprotected lovemaking with several men." "Does Jake know?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not yet," she said. "I'll have to tell him so he can get tested too." "I'm sure he won't take it well," Tim said. "No, probably not," she said. "Look, Tim, I just wanted to apologize to you one last time and hope that maybe you would understand in your heart and forgive me for what I did to you. I now realize that my actions ruined many lives. I could have said no at any time, but I didn't. I was stupid and greedy, and I let my hormones get the better of my rational mind, and now I'm paying for it. I had the best husband and lover a girl could ask for, and I gave it all up for something new. I know you hate me, and you have every right to, but I don't want to go to my grave without your forgiveness." Tim considered her words carefully. It was the first time he remembered her actually taking responsibility for what she did and acknowledging the impact of her actions on others. He could continue to hate her, but he recalled his sessions with Rose. Holding a grudge against Candy wouldn't help him move on. He nodded. "Okay, Candy," he said. "I forgive you." She cried, sitting in a chair. He thought about pulling her into his arms and started to stand up. She waved him off. "Thank you so much, Tim," she said through tears. "This means more to me than you know. Listen, I want you to find a woman you can love and trust. Marry her and have children. I'm over it. I'm done. But you have your whole life ahead of you, and you deserve to be happy." "Thank you," he said. "I'll do so. And if you ever want to just talk, let me know, okay?" She nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "I will, Tim," she said. "Thank you for coming and talking to me. I've missed you so much these past few months." "I miss the woman I married," Tim said calmly. "By the way, how are things with Jake and Mike?" She shook her head. "It's not good," she said. "Lately, he has become very cruel. He didn't take losing to you in court very well. You probably know that his business has suffered a lot lately." "I noticed," Tim said. "Did he hurt you physically?" "Not yet, but he's very harsh," she said. "Do you want me to be with you when you tell him about your diagnosis?" Tim asked. "No, but thanks for asking anyway," she said. "This is my responsibility, and I have to deal with it. You know, I keep thinking that if I had just told him to leave that first day of camping, we would still be together." "It's quite possible," Tim said, "but I have a feeling that at some point it would have happened anyway. He's been after you for quite some time." "I think you're right," she said. "Look, I'm really tired and I need to rest before I go back. Thanks for coming. This means more to me than you know." "You're welcome, Candy," he said. "And remember, call me if you just want to talk." "Fine," she nodded weakly. "I will. Goodbye, Tim," she added. "Think about me from time to time." "Fine." He sensed a certain finality in her last statement and wondered if she intended to commit self-destruction. "I will," he said. "Just don't do anything stupid, okay?" She smiled. "I won't," she said. He stood up and headed toward the door. Bernice approached him before he left. "Thank you, Tim," she said, hugging him. "It means more to her than you think, and to me too." "You're welcome, Bernice," he said. "Keep an eye on her, okay?" "I will," she said. A couple of weeks later, Tim was sitting on his couch, eating dinner and watching the evening news, when he heard a report that caught his attention. The bodies of a local businessman, his son, and a woman believed to be the man's mistress were found earlier today in what police believe was a double homicide self-destruction, the presenter said. Jacob Hudson, president and founder of Hudson Consulting, along with his son and a woman who has not yet been identified, were found dead. All three were sufferers of fire shot wounds, authorities said. Police are investigating the incident, and more details will be provided as they are released. After recovering from his initial shock, Tim called Bernice. She was sobbing when she answered the phone. "Bernice, what's going on?" he asked. "We just got word that Candy is dead," she said. "It looks like that prick Jake shot her, then his own son, and himself." "Oh my God," Tim said. "I saw the news report and hoped it wasn't her. I'm so sorry." "That's her," Bernice said. "Do the police have any idea why this happened?" Tim asked. "They're not 100% sure," she said. but I'm pretty sure she told Jake about her HIV, and he lost his mind. They're now conducting an autopsy." "I'm really sorry, Bernice," Tim said. "I want you to know that I never wanted this to happen." "I know, Tim," she said. "Candy made her own bed and paid for it. Still, it's hard to lose your only child like that. I'm just glad you were able to make peace with her. I like to think she's in a better place now." "Fine. Let me know if there is anything I can do," he said. "Thank you, Tim," she said. Candy's memorial service was held a couple of weeks later, and Tim took the day off work to be there with her parents. According to the autopsy results, both Jake and Mike, like Candy, were found to be HIV positive. From what the police could piece together, Candy told Jake about her diagnosis and suggested they get tested. When Jake and Mike learned they were also positive, Hudson Sr. shot her in the head, then his son, and finally himself. Tim spent several days mourning Candy's end of life, remembering the good years they had spent together. Then one day, out of the blue, he received a visit from Cynthia Stone, another representative who worked on his team. "Hello, cowboy," she said. "Would you like to join us for happy hour tonight? You look like you could use some company." Tim thought about it for just a moment. He almost refused her, but then changed his mind. "What the hell?" he said. "I could use some good company right now. Of course, I'll join you." "Well, then come to Hitchhikers after work, okay?" she asked, smiling. "I'll be there," he said. "Thanks for the invitation." So the cycle of life continues, he thought when she left.